In this video, we complete step 36, the sample method. The sample method will randomly select rows from the data frame. We are going to give our users two choices on how to randomly select rows. One way is by providing this parameter n will simply be an integer as the number of rows to randomly sample. The other way is to provide a fraction, some number between 0 and 1, that will select a fraction of the number of rows. So for instance, if the user provides us a number like 0.2, the sample method will return 20% of the rows back. Now, there's going to be one other option here, and that's to sample with or without replacement. So that's what this parameter means. So regardless of whether you're sampling with n or with frac, you'll be able to sample with or without replacement, meaning that if replacement is true, then the same row can appear more than one time. If it is false, which is the default, then at most every row will appear one time in the sample. The final parameter is seed, which will be an integer and is not required, but will allow the users to set the random number generator seed in NumPy if they so choose. Okay, so let's get started here. We're going to first begin by completing the case whenever the user gives us n. So, and to do this, we're going to rely on NumPy's random module to do the heavy lifting. So again, we're relying on NumPy, but this time we're going to dig into the random module, which contains dozens of functions that will help us do stuff with randomization. So in this case, we're going to choose the choice function. So the choice function, what it does is it selects randomly, from a collection of objects. So our collection of objects will be the numbers 0 to n, and not df, but self. So we're going to create a range object, which is just a collection that it's able to sample from. And the second parameter here is the size of this, which will be n. That's what our user is providing us. And we will allow our users to, we'll just use whatever the users give us for replace. So the choice function also has this same exact replace parameter to sample with or without replacement. Okay, so what this is going to do is it's going to return us some numbers between 0 and n, not inclusive of n, 0 and the number of rows in the data frame. So, length we've already, computed above. So this will be between 0 and the number of rows in the data frame. We will select n of those rows with or without replacement, determining whether or not the user wants to. So this will return us some row numbers. So we're actually going to sample the row numbers. So that's going to help us out here on how to actually make this selection. So we will just return our data frame of just those particular rows, and we're going to have to actually convert this to a list. So rows is going to be a NumPy array, and just like in the previous step, we had to convert NumPy arrays into a list in order to make the selection, since our data frame only works with lists as the row selection. So we're going to do simultaneous row and column selection. So the rows will go there. The columns, we're just going to select everything for the columns. Okay, so let's go ahead and see how this looks in the Jupyter Notebook. So we're down here. So here's df. So if we want to randomly sample, say, 2 rows, that looks good. So these will be, I'm just rerunning the same thing over and over again. Now we can make replacement true And then actually, we can actually sample more than the number of rows that we have. So we're going to guarantee ourselves some duplication somewhere. So we can see Eleni and Teddy are duplicated. So those rows have been duplicated. So you'll get duplication, or the possibility of duplication, whenever replace is true. Okay, so that looks good. Now, so that's working for, it looks like it's working when the user gives us n. So if the user provides us a fraction, so then we're going to have to do a little bit of math here. So if the user does provide us with a fraction, so if frac, so if it's not none and it's not 0, then we can actually just use this frac to calculate n. So we'll just say n equals frac times the length of self. Okay, so this will give us some fraction. Now, this will not return us an integer, so we're going to have to force this to be an integer by passing it into int. So basically, we're just going to, if the user gives us a number for frac, we're going to turn this into a fraction like this, or turn it into an actual whole number n, and that will get passed, will eventually get passed into here. Okay, so let's see how that works. So if we say frac equals like 0.5, so 0.5 is 50% of 4, so it should return 2 rows, and it does. If we say 0.8, which is 3.2, which will be rounded down to 3, so we'll return 3 rows. So that looks good. Now, if replace is true, we could say we want 300%, and that will return here 12 rows, so 3 times 4 is 12, so that also works and looks good. Okay, so that looks like it's working. It says raise a value error if frac is not positive and a type error if n is not an integer. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So just to complete this, so we kind of skipped over that. So if frac is not a, not is instance, but if frac is less than 0, not positive, so less than or equal to 0, then we're going to raise a value error here and say frac must be positive. That takes care of that case. And then we'll raise a type error if n is not an integer. So, so if n is not an integer, say if not is instance n integer, then we will raise a type error, and we'll just say that n must be an integer. Okay. So we're not going to handle the case if the user gives us both frac and n, so you might be wondering about that. You can certainly add a case for that to make sure they only give us one of those. We're just not going to handle that here. One last thing, we need to do something whenever the seed parameter is given us. So if the user does give us a seed, then what we're going to do is say, no, we're going to set the seed by doing calling the seed function and just passing the seed into here like this. So if seed is given to us, then we will go ahead and set the seed. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So let's go through here one at a time again. So yes, if the seed is given to us, we'll set the seed. If we're given a frac, then we'll just check that the fraction is positive. If it is, then we will create or calculate n. If n is not an integer, so the user must give us an integer or give us frac. So we'll raise the type error if n is not an integer. Otherwise, here's where the heavy lifting comes into place. We're going to choose, we're going to use the choice function from NumPy and select from the possible number of rows, the possible values for the row numbers, and then we'll also just pass along the replace, whatever the option that the user gave us for replace. So this will return us the, the row numbers, and we just have to convert this to a list, and then make the selection and select just those rows along with all of the columns. So that looks good for that. And let's go ahead and run a PyTest here. And this is going to be test sample. And looks like we passed it. All right, great. So now we can randomly sample rows in our data frame with or without replacement. And that completes step number 36.